CBS News coverage of Campaign 72, the election year. The Democratic National Convention. Tonight, the opening session. This broadcast is sponsored by Ford, who invites you to see all the 72 better ideas at your Ford dealers. Reporting from CBS News Convention headquarters in Miami Beach, here is correspondent Walter Cronkite.
Good evening. This is where it all begins. Within an hour, the 36th Democratic National Convention. Crowding into this hall at Miami Beach, 5,100 delegates and alternates to shape their party and to choose the man that they want to be president. 80% of them have never attended a national convention before. And in a sense, it's a convention new to the Democrats, too, a legacy of that 1968 reform movement to make the party more democratic, to broaden the participation, take it down to the grassroots. Tonight, 1 out of every 3 delegates down there will be a woman. 1 out of every 4 is under 31. 1 out of every 5 is a black or other minority. They are at the end of the Campaign 72 primary trail, stretching all the way back to New Hampshire in March, back when few persons indeed would have given very much argument that Senator Edmund Muskie would be the man to step onto that podium down there later this week, accept the nomination, and to set out to try to wrest the presidency from Richard Nixon. But there were 23 pitfalls on that primary trail, 23 state elections, and they took their toll, as we all know. So Muskie comes to this convention in 4th place in delegate strength, and his only hope for the nomination resting on a deadlock and a search for a compromise candidate. But he's got some power at this convention nonetheless, as we'll see as we go on through this evening. Ahead of him is his old running mate, Senator Hubert Humphrey, the top half of the 1968 ticket, and Alabama Governor George Wallace, their third-party rival from the last time around on this circuit. And ahead of them all is the new man of the hour, Senator George McGovern, a Don Quixote-like figure when he announced 18 months ago. But methodically, and with a superb organization, he taught the old professionals a few things about their new politics, and now he has the nomination almost within grasp, although still tantalizingly out of reach. We hope to have a word with George McGovern very shortly. CBS News coverage of the Democratic National Convention will continue in a moment.
To demonstrate a point, see if you can answer this quiz about cars. True or false? Disc brakes wear twice as long as drum brakes. A stabilizer bar gives better radio reception. An axle ratio of 3 to 1 gives better gas mileage than a ratio of 2 to 1. The answer to all 3 is false. The point is, to be a smart car buyer, you have to know a lot more than you used to. So Ford Motor Company has written a book called Car Buying Made Easier. Not easy, easier. And they're convinced that if you become a smarter car buyer, they'll get their share. To get your free copy of the book, write Ford Motor Company Listens, The American Road, Dearborn, Michigan. They listen better, and they'd like to hear from you.
Confidence. Confidence. Colgate's double ring of confidence. Fluoride confidence for fewer cavities. Only Colgate has clinically tested MFP fluoride. No toothpaste fights cavities better. Plus, mouthwash confidence for fresher breath. Colgate has concentrated mouthwash ingredients. Fluoride confidence plus mouthwash confidence. That's Colgate's double ring of confidence.
Confidence. It's the name of the game.
The time has come.
It's a fresh, natural feeling.
The time for Bright Side.
Bright Side shampoo with its natural organic conditioner. In a cleansing lather you almost feel, conditioning every strand. Suddenly, your hair feels so alive, shining inside and out with a soft, healthy glow.
Go organic with Bright Side shampoo.
The man of the hour here, whether he makes it or stumbles right on the threshold of the presidential nomination, is Senator George McGovern of South Dakota. And David Shoemaker is with him now at the Doral Hotel. David?
Walter, I'm not sure whether he'll stumble or if someone might trip him if he has the chance. Edmund Muskie tried it today, Senator. He says he's bitter about what he calls your rebuff. Why weren't you interested in a compromise on California?
Well, we can't compromise on something that involves the rule of law. How do you compromise on the California law, especially when that law is reinforced by the rules of the Democratic Party? What I was asked to do was to betray the responsibilities I have as a person in public life to respect for the law, and I can't do that. I'm willing to talk about compromise on these questions involving some of the states where candidates or their delegates were accused of breaking the rules, but no one's accused us of breaking the rules in California. What they want to do is change the rules after the election is over, and there's no basis about talking about a silly issue like that.
Senator, why weren't you willing to go ahead into a private meeting and just feel the other side out?
Well, because the very nature of it was objectionable to me. When the senator proposed that we go behind closed doors, a half a dozen candidates, and settle an issue in which every delegate in this convention has a vital interest, I just thought it was wrong. I've been an advocate of open politics. What I had hoped Senator Muskie would do would be to issue a public statement saying that he understood the rules in California, that he entered the contest out there knowing what the rules were, and that he expected the results of that primary to be respected. That's what he should have done.
But, of course, he said that he was going to work against you tonight on this California challenge. Are you surprised?
Well, I'm
bitter?
disappointed. I'm disappointed. No, I'm not bitter about it, and I'm sure Senator Muskie and I will get together at some point and do what we can to support the nominee of the Democratic Party. I fully expect to be that nominee. Certainly, that's been the spirit in which we've worked, but I was disappointed, very frankly, that he didn't follow the lead of Senator Mansfield and Senator Hard and others who have said they thought it was unfair to change the rules after the game is over. We just don't function that way in this country.
Would you expect now there could be some sort of a conciliatory meeting after tonight?
Oh, yes, I think so. I would say that at some stage, either during the convention or right afterwards, the Democrats will do what they always do. It seems unbelievable, I know, but we'll have a unity meeting of some kind, and we'll get together and resolve these disputes.
In 30 seconds or so, Senator, two quick questions. Are you nervous?
I'm not nervous. I'm a little bit tired, but I'm not nervous. I feel good about it. We've done our work, and we've done it well. I think we're prepared for the fight tonight, and I think we're going to win.
And are you working on your acceptance speech?
Yes, I am, as a matter of fact. I penned a few lines today. They didn't come out just the way I wanted it, so I decided maybe to get a night's rest and take another shot at it tomorrow.
Would you expect to stay up all night tonight?
No, I don't think so. I think maybe sleep is in order after all the hard work we've done. We have some excellent people working for us on the convention floor. They're under the leadership of Mrs. Jean Westwood of Utah. She's one of the ablest women in American politics, and I'm very confident she'll handle our floor work very well tonight.
Senator, thank you.
Senator George McGovern facing a big night here at the Convention Hall in Miami Beach, the credentials fight that may well give us a clue as to whether he will sweep on to the first ballot nomination at this convention or face an even greater fight as the days drag on here. In the background, you may hear down there on the convention floor as the delegates begin to pour in here for an opening gavel that is expected, with about an hour from now, the music of the New Directions. It's a 135-member group of teenagers of a choir from the Riverside Baptist Church, led by Reverend Jack Day, and they're going to provide all the music for the convention here, along with the orchestra led by Sammy Spear. So you'll hear that in the background occasionally as we prepare for this first session. Today was a big day here. Senator Muskie tried an 11th-hour peace move to head off the impending seating fights over California and Illinois and the others tonight. If the battle is joined, he said, the toll in political dead and injured could be horrendous, and the party and its nominee could be the casualties. Muskie wanted the candidates to meet and try to work out a compromise that he had in mind. But that idea collapsed when McGovern refused, unless the session were open to the press and public. You just heard Senator McGovern on that point. So the fights are in store. A big burden of covering them is going to fall on our experienced correspondents down there on the floor. Mike Wallace, Roger Mudd, Dan Rather in the lower left corner for the moment, and John Hart. John, since you have California and you were at that state's caucus today, perhaps we can start with you. What does it look like there?
Well, Walter, I was just talking to Roz Wyman of the California delegation, and she summed up the whole day as being tantamount to nothing. What we have here is the most helpless delegation on the floor, and of course the anti-McGovern coalition is the most helpless part of that delegation. They were going to have a big fight at a combined caucus over who gets to sit at this microphone and who gets to use the telephone to the podium, but the Humphrey people decided to stay out of that fight and let the McGovern 3 co-chairmen, John Burton of California, the assemblyman is sitting here now. They're waiting for the fight that they believe will come when the California challenge comes up. And then, of course, the challenge to the ruling as to what is a majority at this convention will be decided, they believe. So this is a day of tantamount to nothing for California until, of course, everything happens later on this evening.
In just a moment, we're going to take a long look, probably. It'll take a while to try to explain the perplexities of all of this diplomatic, or parliamentary maneuvering, rather, regarding these credential fights on the floor tonight and the various motions that will be made. But right now, let's continue that tour of the floor. Mike Wallace?
I'm down here in New York, Walter, and New York is the biggest delegation on the floor, as you know. New York, a huge McGovern state, too, with 258 out of the 278 New York votes going for McGovern. At least it looks that way. But the McGovern people are having fits trying to make sure that their delegates here are going to stay in line, because they're mavericks, these McGovern people. For instance, on the subject of dealing for a compromise with a hated Richard Daley. He is not a popular man with the McGovern delegates in New York. Or on subjects like abortion or amnesty or some of the other things that are going to come up tonight and for the rest of the week. You see, the McGovern people here in New York are independent, to say the least. There is a youth caucus, there is a women's caucus, a black caucus, a Puerto Rican caucus, a Jewish caucus, and something called the New Democratic Coalition, which has made a kind of religion out of losing in New York. Well, because of all of that independence, the McGovern leaders have assigned one whip to every 8 McGovern delegates in this crowd. One whip to tell each 8 McGovern delegates what kind of a vote on any given issue will best serve the interests of the senator from South Dakota. Jimmy Breslin, the author, who is himself a New York delegate, says it's the biggest babysitting operation in the history of politics. Right at the beginning tonight, you'll be able to see how it works. The South Carolina challenge comes up first. That's one in which the challengers want to make that delegation half female, half male. The McGovern people are with the women. Watch how New York votes. See how the babysitting works, Walter.
Mike, you aren't suggesting that any of that New York McGovern delegation is going to vote anti-McGovern on the California challenge, are you?
Well, there are some purists who might. And by purists, I mean they really do believe in participatory politics, and it's conceivable that there are some mavericks here who would do that. However, they had a big love fest. You know, coming from New York, what's been going on with New York Democratic politics over the past, well, time immemorial. And they had all kinds of fight going on up there at the Diplomat Hotel today. They finally put it all together. They have 4 co-chairmen. It took them almost as long to nominate themselves a chairman as it's going to take this convention to nominate themselves a president. In any case, they finally settled it. It's a love fest going on, and they say that as a result of that, perhaps the McGovern people are going to be easier to handle than otherwise.
Roger Mudd?
Walter, you're talking about the new politics and the old politics. Someone said the difference was that in the old politics, they did what the bosses said, but in the new politics, they do what the bosses say. You just have to tell them why they're having to do it first. In Illinois, which is one of the big delegations in rows D and C, is a combination of the new and the old. It is probably the messiest delegation in this convention. They really don't have a leader. Richard Daley is not here. They caucused this afternoon, and the regular Democratic political machine in Chicago tried to force a confrontation at their caucus. They hired 4 anti-frame ushers to admit only those elected delegates and exclude the so-called Chicago challengers. It didn't work. The whole meeting was opened up. And this afternoon we were treated to some political oratory, the likes of which you can hear only in Illinois.
The situation here is that the Singer challengers, led by City Alderman William Singer, have been seated, and the Daley delegates, 59 of them, are not seated. This will be one of the challenges. The outcome depends in large measure on the outcome in California. Senator McGovern, 2 days ago, in an interview with the night newspapers, which has an outlet here in Miami, said that he would be willing to compromise on Chicago. He'd be willing to have the Daley organization seated in return for a winner-take-all in California. Immediately, the Singer people hit the roof, got in touch with him, and this afternoon, Senator McGovern, in a letter to the Singer delegation, rolled back from the quotes that he'd given the night newspapers. Where that leaves the Singer people, they're not sure. All they know is they've got their seats, and that until the issue is settled by the whole convention, they will keep their seats. They hope and they are willing to take a compromise, splitting the votes, the 59 votes, with Mr. Daley. Mr. Daley has let it be known he will talk only to McGovern. He will not talk to any intermediaries, and as yet no intermediary has come forth to propose a compromise with the mayor. Reportedly the mayor is not in town, but he could get here in a big hurry. If he's not seated at this convention, it will be the first time in 20 years he has not been. The McGovern people, of course, know that without some cooperation from Cook County and the Daley organization, they're going to have a very tough time carrying Illinois in the fall. And if McGovern is nominated and alienates the Daley organization, many people, at least many in downstate Illinois, are predicting that President Nixon will carry Illinois again. Alder?
The mayor gave an indication of how rough he can play this game when in that big Democratic telethon, he pulled his 174 volunteers off the telephones and canceled the telephones in Chicago, and the rest of the party had to get together and arrange a substitute arrangement right quickly. Dan Rather?
Have you talked to Senator Kennedy at all? We're not on yet.
Dan, I think you are.
We'll be getting a little lag. We're with John Bailey, the chairman of the Connecticut delegation, who just walked in the hall. And I was saying to Chairman Bailey just before we came on, Walter, that one of the questions that Marty Plissner, our political editor, said to ask as soon as we got on the floor was, number one, has John Bailey talked to Senator Edward Kennedy? And Mr. Chairman, let me ask you again, and we now are on. Have you talked to the Senator?
Not in the last week.
Not within the last week. Do you think there's any chance at all, any remote chance at all, that Senator Kennedy would accept a draft at all? Now, you've known the Kennedy family for years. You're as experienced as any politician in this hall. Your honest gut opinion.
Well, it all depends how this convention went. And if it was real necessity, I would assume that he would have to look at the question again.
You know, there are a lot of people, Mr. Bailey, who say that what they're looking for in this hall is one man of principle. That is, one man who is not necessarily for George McGovern, who does not necessarily think George McGovern would make a good candidate in his state. And I gather that you're on record as saying that it might be tough to carry the ticket in Connecticut if Senator McGovern headed it.
After all, we felt that if Senator Kennedy ran, we'd be in good condition in Connecticut. Also, Hubert Humphrey carried the state 4 years ago, and Muskie is popular. McGovern is unknown quality.
Well, the part of the question was, though, that you have a reputation of being a man of principle. You're uncommitted as far as your vote is concerned. But how do you feel about the California challenge, which, after all, is the leverage for this?
When my name is called, I'll have to vote.
So you're still playing it tight and close?
That's right.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. John Bailey of Connecticut, and Walter, it was accidental that he just passed by here then. One of the things we wanted to bring to your attention is that while this is a convention in which there are very few power brokers in the sense that term is usually used, there are a few people around who have a few votes in their hip pockets. John Bailey, the former Democratic National Chairman, who's 68 years old now, has what some of the younger delegates in Connecticut call the aging gunfighter syndrome, is one of those who can be an influence on 18 to 20 votes. There are a few others. Governor Hall in Oklahoma be an influence on 10 or 12 votes. Gordon St. Angelo in Indiana, although we gather there's been a good deal of seepage of his control in recent days, is another who can deliver some votes. As you just heard, John Bailey of Connecticut is still playing it very close to the chest. Now, if I'm going to judge, what that tells us is that as of this moment, Bailey is still uncertain as to how this vote on the California challenge is going to go. As you heard, Bailey also, and this could be important as we go along in the week, still at this late hour is not knocking down the possibility of an Edward Kennedy draft should McGovern stumble.
Dan, you were tangled with one of the oldest veterans of these convention proceedings with John Bailey, as you know, down there. I just happen to have in my mind that he goes back 11 conventions. This is his 11th convention. His first convention was when he was 24 years old, and that was in Houston, Texas, the convention that nominated Alfred E. Smith. So he's a real veteran of these proceedings.
Walter, you know, someone once said that a lot of politicians like to mend their fences by hedging. And it seems to me for the moment that's exactly what John Bailey is doing.
How's this? Thank you, Dan. And up on the podium, through this tough night of credentials, challenges, and parliamentary rulings that'll be the whole big name of the game, is Daniel Shore. Dan?
Yes, sir.
How are you doing?
Well, so far so good, because the great procedural wrangle hasn't yet started. You want to hear about it?
We won't go into detail yet, Dan. I've got a kind of a prepared piece here. I'm letting you in on the whole thing that's going to give some of the details, and then we'll come to you for a real look at how it's going to work out on the floor tonight. Is that okay with you?
Sure.
All righty, let's do it that way. We have all those credential challenges ahead of us tonight, the big California and Illinois cases, and the platform fights tomorrow night if they get through the credentials tonight and the rules. They got to go to the rules before the platform, and I don't think they'll get to those tonight. They say that with the credentials fights tonight, we may be here until the very early hours of Wednesday morning, or even the late Tuesday morning, or even the late hours of tomorrow morning. Anyway, then comes up the rules and the platform. If they get through that Tuesday night, all of it will lead to Wednesday and what this convention's all about, picking a presidential nominee. If you wanted any bets from this old correspondent, I'd suggest that would come on Thursday rather than Wednesday. CBS News estimates that if that, excuse me, if that first ballot were taken right now, George McGovern probably would get 1,352 and a fraction of the 1,508 and a fraction needed for the nomination. Now, that's 156 short, and the 151 California votes he'll be battling for tonight, therefore, quite obviously, loom very, very big. Humphrey's second with 563 and a fraction. Wallace is a third with 390. There are the figures up there. And Muskie is fourth with 248 and a fraction. Now, perhaps we ought to explain right now those fractions. The convention has 3,016 votes, but some states have more delegates than votes, so the votes are divided. In fact, there are a total of 3,203 delegates here. One delegate may be casting a half vote, for example, or it could get down to even smaller portion than that. Some Credentials Committee compromises on challenges gave delegates even more unusual fraction of votes, and they will be quite important. Since a simple majority rules, in most cases, one fraction more than half the vote is enough to win. You follow that. The numbers shift almost constantly as one delegate or another changes his mind about one candidate or another. We have a state-by-state delegate board set up in the so-called Flying Donkey Lounge down here in Convention Hall, a lounge for the delegates supported by the airlines, and Morton Dean is there to tell us about it.
Walter, the Flying Donkey Lounge. Not a bad assignment, not bad at all, at least not for now. The delegates coming in here to relax, to sip a glass of orange juice, a glass of milk, or have a cup of coffee. They'll be able to come into this lounge throughout the proceedings to take a look at this giant tote board that CBS News has put up for the purpose of following state by state and candidate by candidate just how well or how poorly the candidates are doing during the presidential nominating procedures. Of course, our story is a tale of two states, California and Illinois. And up here, the first state to be heard from when that roll is called on the nominees is California. We see 271 delegate votes. As of the moment, 120 for McGovern, 106 for Humphrey, 16 for Wallace, 6 for Muskie, and others 23. Now, that could change, of course, if the McGovern people are successful in challenging the Credentials Committee activity, then all 271 votes will be transferred into the McGovern column, and winner take all will be in evidence. Proportional representation will have been defeated on the floor. Over in Illinois, Illinois has 170 delegates, as we have said so often during the past few weeks. McGovern 86, Humphrey 7, Muskie 54.5, others 9 and 13.5, that half vote there, either uncommitted or just not known, people not responding to our request for just where they stand on the presidential candidates. Now, if Mayor Daley is successful tonight, and if the convention overrules what the Credentials Committee has done, then we'll take about 42 of these votes, 42 out of the McGovern column, and moving them over, way over to not known or uncommitted. So McGovern, if Daley is successful, will lose about 42 votes from Chicago, 42 votes from Illinois. And that's about it, Walter, from the Flying Donkey Lounge.
Thousands of us have come here for this convention. I think the estimate this evening was 50,000 persons here. Some to run it, of course, and some to attend it just for the spectacle of the thing, people who go to anything, the jet set, and some to cover it. Some 7,000 to 8,000 people in the media, they say. A few of us have had very much time off to look around outside the convention complex. In a moment, we'll try to do just that for you.
One night, my wife and I had been out shopping. As we returned to the car about an hour later, I realized that someone had poured paint remover all over the vehicle. The following morning, when I got to Allstate, I was still angry about the whole affair.
The first thing I did was try to put Mr. Gamel at ease. We then went out and took a look at the damage to his automobile.
He realized how badly damaged the vehicle was, and he sympathized with me.
I then asked Mr. Gamel if he had a shop that he wanted to do the work.
I had no idea how to start in a situation like this.
And I said, well, if you'd like, I'll help you, and I'll get the job done.
So he took control of the whole situation, and he contacted the local body shop.
The body shop and Mr. Gamel agreed to have the car done, and I sent Mr. Gamel his check.
The following Friday, when I picked up the car, I could see that they had done a beautiful paint job. Their slogan is for real. I was in good hands with Allstate.
If I didn't believe it, I wouldn't be working here.
This is Viva, and this is another leading paper towel that's known for its absorbency. Let's face it, like any good towel, they're both absorbent. But let's see what happens after they get wet, and you put them to work with an all-purpose powdered cleaner. Viva keeps right on working. Viva didn't fall apart. Viva, the absorbent paper towel that keeps on working.
Mr. Scott wants to see you both in his office.
Some people react twice as much to everything. For these people, we make an antiperspirant with double protection. New Calm 2 spray powder. It contains an effective powder plus a special drying ingredient to help keep you really dry. So if your reactions are twice as strong, your antiperspirant should be New Calm 2 spray powder. New Calm 2?
That's right.
This is the Miami Beach Convention Hall. A few moments, perhaps a half hour or so, from the opening gavel of the 36th National Democratic Convention, one that looks like a real old-fashioned Democratic Donnybrook from here, our vantage point from the CBS News anchor booth. They're pouring into the hall right now, these delegates, and it looks like there are quite a few of them already here, but the crowd outside is immense trying to get in, and it will be some time before the gavel falls. Outside the hall, as I say, they are pouring toward this convention hall, which is down toward the south end of Miami Beach, a couple of blocks back from the beach itself. The security is particularly tough here tonight. They're taking a while to clear each of the delegates as he comes in with his special coded and colored pass for the night. Our helicopter up above the hall shows you the overall scene now. That helicopter is just about over the beach, looking west at the convention hall and the front of the hall itself, back toward Miami Beach proper and the bay and there Miami in the background. The city has played host to only one national political convention before. That was the Republican convention last time, 1968. This year, For one of the few times in our history, the 5th time only, a city is playing host to both of the political conventions. Miami Beach got not only this convention in the early bidding for it, but it got the Republican convention by default. That will meet here next month. The Republicans had planned to meet in San Diego, but they ran afoul of a lot of problems out there and decided to come to Miami Beach, too. This is the view looking north, up Hotel Row, Collins Avenue of Miami Beach. And that Collins Avenue can really get jammed with traffic, as you can imagine. A single avenue northbound and one southbound for all of the traffic that crowds into all of those hotels. The Democratic National Committee has found 19,600 hotel rooms for delegates and the VIPs and the media and so forth. That's one thing that makes this a great convention city. There are hotel rooms available. That beach is just one hotel after another, as all of you know who've ever been here. Democratic National Committee says, by the way, that it can do a lot better in hotels than it can in seats for the convention. 13,384 seats in Convention Hall here, and they claim they've got 10 times that number of persons who want those seats. It's been raining in Miami Beach today. The Chamber of Commerce won't like that plug, but it's true. You can't duck the weather. And it's been, in fact, quite wet with the squall lines approaching, passing through the city. And it looks to me, looking outside there, like it's raining at this very moment. Let's see, even if it takes a minute or two, if we can't review what has brought us to this crucial vote that's going to come here on the convention floor tonight. We've been talking about the credentials challenges in California. It's all kind of complicated. And let's just take it in sort of an ABC fashion. Well, it all goes back to 1968 and the Democrats' Chicago Convention. That convention ordered some major changes in the party to assure that political machines and the bosses didn't control it. Changes intended to just make sure that anyone who was interested, the young, the women, the minorities particularly, those who hadn't been particularly a part of political parties in the past, to make sure that anyone could participate in the party at all levels, in the precinct, the county, the congressional district, right on up to the national convention. These reforms were worked out by a commission, headed at first by a senator from South Dakota, who just happened to be named George McGovern. Now, when he decided to run for the presidency, he stepped down, and it was taken over by Congressman Donald Frazier from Minnesota. And that commission made a lot of rules to strip the party procedures of the practices by which the bosses used to control the machinery. And one matter the commission took up were the so-called winner-take-all primaries, state primaries in which the candidate with the greatest number of votes got all of the state's convention delegates, and the other candidates, no matter how many votes they got, if they didn't get a plurality, received none of the delegates. Well, the commission generally agreed that that was a bad thing, but making it illegal would have required some states to change their basic election laws, and the commission was persuaded that there just wasn't enough time to do that in all the states. So the commission merely urged that winner-take-all be dropped, and indicated that it would not make it actually illegal until 1976. Well, most states complied with the urging, all except 4 primary states, and of those, only one had a big enough block of delegates to seriously affect the convention. And that was California, with a great big block, 271 convention votes, second largest block in the whole convention. So California, with its 271 winner-take-all votes, and the fact that it was one of the last primaries, became crucial to the presidential nominating race. Now, George McGovern didn't get a majority of the votes there, but he got a plurality, more than anyone else. He got 44% of the vote. Hubert Humphrey was a fairly close second. He got 39%. The others, Muskie, Jackson, Chisholm, Wallace, Yorty, and so on, got a scattering few percent each. But that gave McGovern all 271 delegate votes, and it put him well on the way to a first ballot nomination here in Miami Beach. Well, then, 2 weeks ago, the convention's Credentials Committee met in Washington to certify, as it must, the delegates who are approved to come to the convention. Now, if anyone claims that any delegate or a group of delegates was selected not according to the party rules, then that's the time to bring it up at that Credentials Committee meeting. There were a record number of challenges this year, thanks in part to those new rules that confused a lot of people. But the big one was California. The anti-McGovern forces got together, and they challenged the whole legality of the winner-take-all primary. They claimed that it, in effect, denied all those millions who voted for candidates other than McGovern a voice in the convention. They claimed that it wasn't in the spirit of the new reform. Well, the McGovern people fought back, and they said that the Credentials Committee could not now change the rules in the middle of the game. But the anti-McGovern forces won, 72 to 66 in the Credentials Committee. McGovern was given just 44% of the California delegation. That's 120 seats instead of 271. The other 151 were given in proportion to the other candidates. Humphrey got 39% of the total, or 106 convention delegates. The McGovern people took the matter to the courts then. It went all the way to the Supreme Court, which last week said it wouldn't get involved, at least at this time, and it was up to the convention to decide its own credentials. So now, tonight, when Mrs. Pat Harris, the chairman of the Credentials Committee, presents her report, there will be a minority report on California. That's a challenge to not seat the Humphrey and other delegates, but to give those 151 seats back to McGovern's people. And then the fun will start on the procedural questions, the parliamentary maneuvering. Down on the floor, among all those delegates, fractional delegates and alternates now taking their seats, there are 3,016 votes. Now, half of 3,016 is 1,508. So a majority of this convention is anything over 1,508. We say anything over 1,508 because of those fractional votes. The smallest voting unit down there, believe it or not, is 1/20th of a vote. But keep in mind that phrase and figure. A majority of the whole convention is anything over 1,508. Now, one clash between the McGovern forces and the Stop McGovern coalition is how many California delegates can vote on the California challenge itself. McGovern, you remember, won 271 in the winner-take-all primary, but the Credentials Committees recommended splitting California in proportion to that actual vote, giving McGovern 120. Now, whether McGovern gets the nomination at all may hinge on whether he can win the fight to seat all 271. Two rulings from the chair and the attempts by the Stop McGovern forces to overturn those rulings are going to be crucial. Chairman O'Brien has said he's going to rule that 120 of McGovern's delegates can vote on the California challenge since they're not in dispute. He'll also rule that Credentials challenges will be decided by a majority of those eligible to vote, not by a majority of the whole convention. Now, here's how all that works. If the chair lets 120 California delegates vote, there'll be 2,865 eligible votes. A simple majority will be anything over 1,432.5 votes. That's what McGovern would need to seat his full delegation and most likely wrap up the nomination. But the Stop McGovern people will try to have the convention overrule Chairman O'Brien and declare that challenges must be settled by a majority of the convention, like the rules say, that McGovern would need over 1,508 votes to seat all his Californians. In these circumstances, CBS News estimates that McGovern would have somewhere around 1,508 votes if the California challenge were held now. The Stop McGovern people also want to overturn Chairman O'Brien's decision allowing 120 California delegates to vote. They want no California delegates permitted to vote on the challenge. And then the total vote to be cast would be smaller, 2,745. A simple majority of those voting, smaller too, of course, anything over 1,372.5. But once again, if the convention overrides its chairman and rules that a majority of the convention is needed to seat McGovern's whole California group, then he's going to need that whole 1,508. In that situation, we estimate he'd have 1,388 votes on his side if the challenge were being decided right this minute. And now, of course, if none of those fights should develop, it would mean that the anti-McGovern forces know that they don't have the votes and have decided to skip this bruising, divisive fight and put all their might behind the platform debate coming up presumably tomorrow. We'll return in a moment, and maybe Dan Shore can add some additional light to that terribly confused picture. And we'll have an interview with a declared non-candidate, too, a little later on, who some people keep talking about anyway, Edward Kennedy.
You're out.
Great, you knocked 2 seconds off.
Hey, Kathy.
Hi, Dad. Hey, is that our new car?
Not yet, honey. Mr. Walden's got me out for a test drive first.
A Ford Torino, huh? Pretty fancy. Can I try it?
Sure. Give it the acid test, Kathy. You don't have to baby Torino. For such a roomy, luxurious car, Torino handles quickly, positively, as if it were much smaller. Notice how our all-new coil suspension smooths out the road, the way big cars do. What do you think, Kathy?
Pretty good, Dad, for a car.
Test drive Torino at your Ford dealer. It just may be more car than you expected.
An election year is a time to remember. And this year, you can remember the time with a Voter's Choice watch from Kodak. There are 3 of these fine calendar watches to choose from with signs of the times on the dials. Elephant, donkey, even Uncle Sam. And you can get yours for only $4.95 in both end flaps from any 3 boxes of Kodak color film. Visit your photo dealer where you see this sign and order your Voter's Choice watch from Kodak.
I bet you think my dog is the best fed dog in town. Well, she is. She loves meat, but I don't feed her this. I give her Gaines Top Choice Chopped Burger for dogs. It's better for her. Top Choice has beef byproducts and real beef, a vegetable, vitamins and minerals, so it's fully nutritious. More nourishing than 1 pound of my best chopped meat. And it costs less, too. Top Choice. Better for her, and she really likes it.
Down on the floor as the delegates continue to pour into this Miami Beach auditorium, awaiting the opening gavel, is Mike Wallace with the wife of one of the leading candidates and the standard bearer of this party just 4 years ago, Muriel Humphrey. Mike?
Walter, I've been trying to tell Mrs. Humphrey, Walter, what you've been explaining about that California business. And I told her how complicated it is. Can you explain the California challenge in simple sentences?
In maybe 3 short words? Very difficult.
What I'd like to know, Mrs. Humphrey, really, and I mean no fooling. Now, you and Hubert Humphrey and George and Eleanor McGovern have been such good friends.
Yes.
For how long?
Oh, ever since George came into the Senate and they moved next door to us, which I think was 12, 13 years ago. I can't quite remember the date.
And you were next door neighbors?
Mm-hmm. In Chevy Chase.
And gave each other sugar and whatever across the back fence?
Yes, of course. You know, when she was out of things, she'd borrow, and if I was out of some things and had some extra people, I'd borrow from her.
When did you last see Eleanor McGovern?
I called her and talked to her in California the night of election night, just before, you know, it all ended because their grandchild was being born.
Yes.
And,
well, what does that do? I know we all, in one way or another, get into competition. Well, what does that do to an old and dear friendship like that? What is happening right now between Hubert Humphrey and George McGovern?
Well, both Hubert and George are very serious candidates and competition, but they're both skilled political people, and you know, it takes a lot of poise and a lot of understanding, and I think they both have it.
And when Senator McGovern suggests that Senator Humphrey is not really being quite fair in the case of the California challenge.
That's part of the game.
And you think you'll be able to patch it up when all is said and done?
Yes, that's the way democracy is. This is the great thing about our country, is that we can have ideas and stick by them hard and fight for them hard and then all work together for the cause.
You've been coming to these Democratic conventions for how long, Mrs.
Well,
Humphrey?
the only one I missed since Hubert and I were involved in politics is the 1948 convention.
And that's where he made his
in Philadelphia.
national reputation
yes.
in the civil rights fight.
And I decided never after that to miss one. I was at home. We had our baby Douglas was a teeny baby then, and I had to stay home, and I listened to it on the radio. No TV then, you know.
Well, I must say that you're a glutton for punishment. You've showed up right at the beginning, and you're going to be here every night, not all the way through.
As you know, I said this is the Super Bowl of all Super Bowls. It is very exciting, and I really do love it. I said that on the telethon the other night, and this is what politics is all about, and this is what the Democratic Party is about.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Humphrey.
Thanks for being with me.
Walter?
Mike, I've heard about the magic of television, but I didn't expect you to show up with an electronic wand down there tonight. It's a handsome-looking microphone you've got. Let's go down to the podium where Daniel Shore perhaps can throw some further light on what's going to transpire tonight in regard to those delegate fights and the credentials fights and the parliamentary maneuvering, Dan. I don't know whether you heard all of that
Yes, I
lengthy
did, Walter.
explanation I went through a moment ago.
Yes, I did. And carrying forward from the situation as you explained it, what happens if the California challenge comes up and there is this qualified majority which you so aptly described? Well, the anti-McGovern forces are fully aware of that situation, and they don't want to do it that way. One of the ploys that they've been thinking of is to challenge the ruling of the chair on what constitutes a majority, and during one of the earlier challenges, for example, during the first one, the South Carolina challenge. When South Carolina comes up, there will be only 9 delegates who will be unable to vote, and all the California temporary delegates, including the Humphrey and others, will be able to vote, and that would make it easier to overrule the chairman. If that happens, Chairman Lawrence O'Brien, he told me, is prepared to rule that it is out of order. It is out of order, he will say, because you can only appeal a ruling of the chair when it is relevant. That is to say, you can only appeal the question of a majority when it makes a difference. If anything is adopted by a margin which lies somewhere between the absolute majority and the qualified majority, then he would entertain an appeal. That's one possible ploy. There is still one other. It may be easier to get a vote to unseat the chairman himself than to try to reverse his ruling. And some of the Wallace delegates are talking of trying to do just that. Now, the election of Larry O'Brien as permanent chairman does not come up on the agenda until after the credentials fight is over. And so some Wallace delegates last night informed the organizers of the convention that they would try to bring up a motion at a very early stage to unseat the chairman and to get another chairman who would give them a more favorable ruling on this issue. I've just been talking to Joseph Califano, who's the counsel to the Democratic National Committee, and he says that the chairman is ready for that too. He will rule that any motion about unseating the chairman is out of order because it is not on the program. You may ask, suppose that's appealed. Well, there may be an appeal, and he may not entertain the appeal, and if you want to know where all the appeals end, there is one little provision of the rules, and that is that the chairman does not have to entertain appeals past the point where he considers that they are dilatory. From a statement that something is dilatory, there is no appeal. So we're going to have an endless series of challenges to rulings, appeals from the challenges, up to the point where Lawrence O'Brien bangs that old gavel and says, this is dilatory and here it must stop. Have I confused you sufficiently?
I think so, Dan, yes. No, I think that's pretty clear, as clear as it can be made, because no one knows, of course, the parliamentarian himself and the chairman of the meeting exactly how these motions are going to fall. That's part of the strategy of the whole thing, isn't it?
That is it has become the strategy. It certainly looks tonight as though we will have the most endless, intricate series of parliamentary maneuvers that we've ever seen at a convention. And I guess the reason for that is that when people agree about what they want to do, they don't have to play that sort of game, but they haven't agreed. And so they're going to resort to every little parliamentary trick in the bag, and this may well be known as the convention, which is the battle of the procedures.
Dan, you know, a possibility was raised late this afternoon that I heard about that could come up the first crack out of the box here if they decided on it this afternoon, the anti-Stop McGovern forces, and that would be to challenge Larry O'Brien's right to even preside as temporary chairman of this meeting. That would come up on the basis that this convention is not running under the new reform rules, that there is no authority for that, that the call to this convention mistook the direction of the 1968 convention and called this convention under the new rules, whereas the 1968 convention merely mandated a study of new rules, which these people would then maintain should be brought before this convention. Under the old rules, the temporary chairman was elected by the convention on a slate usually put forward by the National Committee, but at least he had to be elected. And here, they're not electing him. Under the new rules, the National Committee chairman is automatically the National Convention temporary chairman.
Yes, Walter, that point has been considered, and the answer has been provided to us on that, too, which I will simply report as that answer has been given to me. The Democratic National Committee has named Larry O'Brien as the temporary chairman. The delegates are temporary. Everything here is temporary until it's confirmed. If Larry O'Brien is not accepted as a temporary chairman, there is some question as to whether the delegates have any status. The Democratic National Committee was commissioned to set up a temporary convention until the convention itself could confirm them. So that if there is no legitimacy to Mr. O'Brien as chairman, then this whole thing that we see around us has no legitimacy. And that is the answer that will be given.
Dan, I think that you and I are going to have a long night. That's all I can assume from what we've just been talking about here.
I know you'll bear up, but will I?
I think so, Dan. I think so. Bert Quint is out in front of the convention hall here in the area that has been set aside by the police of Miami and the convention managers for demonstrations. They put a whole area aside for just that. And Bert Quint's there. Bert?
When the Democratic Convention opened in Chicago 4 years ago, there were no demonstrators within sight of the hall. But the downtown streets of Chicago were filled with tear gas and clubs and curses. As this convention is about to begin, it's a far different scene. There are protesters here right on the very edge of the convention complex, this authorized area that you talk about. Right now, there are protesters and protest. But it's not like Chicago, Walter. This demonstration going on now is billed as a poor people's rally. It's sponsored by black groups who want higher income, greater welfare benefits, and lower rents to pay. They've been joined by a hodgepodge of white protest groups, the people who were camped out at Flamingo Park a few blocks away. But with all of these organizations, there are not a lot of people out here, and there are not likely to be a lot of people. As a matter of fact, there are probably 3 times as many security officers around as there are demonstrators, and for that matter, probably 4 times as many journalists. And the protesters that are here, they seem different too. They're not as angry as the protesters were in Chicago. So far, the worst or the strongest thing they've been able to say about the Democrats is that they like the Republicans less. Walter?
There hasn't been really any problem here with the demonstrators yet. Not nearly as many showed up in Miami Beach as had been expected, and it doesn't look like they're going to now. Perhaps a couple of thousand at this point. They've been given a park about half a dozen blocks from the convention hall in which they can pitch their tents and camp out, Flamingo Park. The police chief here in Miami Beach, Rocky Pomerantz, a most enlightened man, has been treating them with kid gloves, telling them the perimeters in which they can operate, and apparently with that kind of police treatment, they're staying pretty well in line. A very brief demonstration of a few students for Democratic Society demonstrated last night and tied up Collins Avenue for a while, but it wasn't anything serious, and they backed off as soon as the police arrived. Mariah McLaughlin is out at the main delegate entrance to this convention hall, where the delegates are continuing to arrive for what promises to be a rather long night's work. Mariah?
Walter, I look like I was in the midst of a demonstration myself a few moments ago. There is security at these doors, and it held up the delegates some before they could get right inside. Briefcases were checked, purses were checked, and these delegates didn't come unprepared. Some of them are carrying grocery bags full of food that looks like it could last for a week, and they're eager to get inside, and they were a little impatient at being stopped at the door. And as we've said before, these delegates come in every size, shape, and age. Everybody is wearing everything from evening clothes to T-shirts to blue jeans, and the only unusual candidate who is outside politicking and working this crowd that was here was the former governor of Massachusetts, Endicott Peabody, who is running for the vice presidency. I would say that if there's a battle going to go on inside the convention hall tonight, that these delegates are eager to get at it. Back to you, Walter.
They figure that the police force plus the military here definitely outnumber the possible demonstrators at this point by around 5, 6, or 7 to 1. There are 3,000 paratroopers, military being held around south of here, 12, 15 miles at Homestead Air Force Base. They're ready for action if needed. The Florida National Guard, about half of that, 3,000 men, camping just a few blocks from the convention hall here. And the police force of Miami Beach has been reinforced by the Dade County and the Miami police force, and everything seems to be in good control. The security inside the hall is very tight. They chased everybody out of this hall last night, and security forces swept the entire hall for any hidden explosives or weapons or anything of that sort. And now, as you saw by that sign behind Mariah McLaughlin, all briefcases and pocketbooks and everything else are being searched as people come into the hall. The credentials are issued each morning. They're not good for the whole convention, as is usually the case, and that kind of caused a tie-up this morning. Took an hour and a half or 2 hours for convention chairman, delegation chairman standing in line to get all their delegates' credentials, but that's part of the security business. They're variously coded with colors and designs on them, and that's going to be the way people are identified to get into this hall. You remember in 1968 they tried the kind of credit card system, a little plastic card that had to go into the gate in order to open the gate so you could get in, but it turned out that a few people were getting in with their credit cards rather than their Democratic credentials, and they've gone back to personal inspection this time before the delegates get in. Roger Mudd is down on the convention floor with one of the important governors who will be heard from in this convention, Governor John West of South Carolina. Roger?
Walter, South Carolina occupies this first block of seats right under the podium, and it will be the first state whose credentials have been challenged to come before the convention. Just a few moments ago, Brock Adams, one of the roving parliamentarians on the floor and a congressman from Washington State, was by here briefing Governor West on just what to expect, what the majority report contained, what the minority report contained, and how it would be handled parliamentarily. Governor West is leading a Humphrey delegation, and the McGovern people in his delegation are under some pressure. Governor?
Yes, Roger.
Can I get a little explanation from you
Yes, sir.
Just how seriously you regard the challenge to South Carolina?
We didn't think it was serious. We didn't think it was serious at all until we have reports, which I think are reliable, that Senator McGovern is supporting the challenge. As you know, the challenge is not on blacks or young people, which you would normally expect, but a challenge purely on the percentage of women. We only have about 30% women when the population gives 50. Well, we think that's a frivolous challenge because we followed the spirit and the letter of the McGovern Reform Commission recommendations. We were given a clean bill of health on that, simply because we didn't achieve a mathematical result. Now we are being challenged. I call it a nitpicking challenge.
But the difference between 30% and 50% is not frivolous, is it?
Well, it's 7 delegates, and of course, but we actively encourage women, and we do have 9 women with full delegates. We have nearly half of our alternates are women. So if we had done anything else to get more women, we would have thwarted the democratic process which we were supposed to be fostering.
So what do you think is going to happen tonight?
Well, I don't know. I've been told that we'll be a sort of a guinea pig or a test case, being the forerunner of the California dispute. We're not seeking that role. We're just trying to get our delegation seated.
And because South Carolina is the first challenge up.
And the question will come on the chair's ruling as to the number necessary to approve.
Constitute a majority.
Right.
Now, what has the parliamentarian instructed you? Mr. Adams, Brock Adams, has been by here.
Yes, and he's been in touch with Mr. O'Hara. And the information we have is that he will rule that a majority in the terms of the committee of the rules will be 1 more than half after subtracting from the whole the total number of seats under challenge. In our case, it's 23 seats, which again is unfair because obviously we're entitled to 16 men.
So you mean none of the men,
no man
no South Carolina male will be able to vote?
Oh, I think that's rank discrimination.
But I'm confused, Governor. If the guidelines call for 50% women and you got 30, why do you call that nitpicking?
simply because the guidelines also said that the product was more important than the formula.
Yes.
And we went very carefully through the process to ensure that we had enough blacks, we had enough young people, and enough women.
Yes.
And it just so happened that we didn't have enough women to get enough votes at the convention.
You're generally leading a Humphrey delegation, are you not?
We have not taken a poll of our delegates. Senator Humphrey has strong support, obviously, but we have taken no straw vote or no count.
But on California, would not the bulk of South Carolina's delegates vote in
no,
for Humphrey in California?
Strangely enough, it was a very much divided vote, so I'm told, until the McGovern forces took the position which they did.
Okay. Thanks, Governor. Thanks very much. This is Roger Mudd with John west of South Carolina, hoping that as a South Carolina male, he will not be discriminated against. Walter?
Larry O'Brien, the temporary chairman of this meeting, is trying to gavel this session into order. It'll take him a moment or so, and CBS News coverage of the Democratic National Convention will continue in a moment.
Discover America on the Monday holidays. It's a great place to visit.
CBS News coverage of the Democratic National Convention will continue after this pause for station identification. This is CBS. CBS News coverage of Campaign 72, the election year, the Democratic National Convention. Tonight, the opening session. Reporting from CBS News Convention headquarters in Miami Beach, here is correspondent Walter Cronkite.
The 36th National Democratic Convention is about to begin. The National Committee Chairman and temporary chairman of this session, Larry O'Brien, is trying to gavel the meeting to order.
Please rise.
Good number of delegates not in their seats.
The chair is honored to present the Most Reverend Coleman Carroll, Archbishop of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Miami, who will now deliver the invocation. Archbishop Carroll.
I stand before you at this time to ask for guidance and wisdom through the grace of Almighty God. The delegates of this convention have a grave obligation to our nation and to the world. We as a people are about to turn a sharp corner in our history. The direction we take will depend to a great extent upon the decisions made here in Miami Beach. Today, we are a divided nation, one that is restless and surely in need of divine assistance. My prayer this evening before this august body is one directed to the Holy Spirit, beseeching him to enlighten the minds and guide the wills of all the delegates. Our great danger is that we may be tempted to put politics before people, that we allow ourselves to become indifferent to the plight of the poor, the needy, and the oppressed. During the past several decades, we have made great strides that brought tremendous good to many of our people in the way and by the way of technology. But in so doing, we have continued to oppress the poor. As our technology has increased, the poor become more oppressed, and many of us remain indifferent. No longer can we be indifferent to those who cry out, whether they be in the ghetto or whether they be those who lack decent housing, adequate education, job security. Nor can we remain indifferent to our youth, who by their dissent have shown their eagerness to become an active part and a party in giving proper direction to the future of this country. This is the week of decision for the Democratic Party. Strengthened by the grace of the Holy Spirit, it is imperative that all stand up to the challenge and at this convention rectify the inactivity that can and must bring help and assistance to the poor, and to do so not with promises but with great speed. It is my prayerful wish, as I am certain it is yours, that primarily we realize persons are more important than politics, and the opportunities to supply the needs of our people are immediate. If this convention not only realizes the importance of these needs, but takes positive action to select a dynamic, courageous, forward-looking candidate, only then will our country heal the divisions that affect it at the present time and make it for all men the great republic that it can and should be. This is my prayer for you this evening, and I hope it will be your prayer also. May God bless all of you.
Please be seated. Now let me introduce one of the ablest politicians and hardest workers in the Democratic Party. One of my closest advisors during the 2 years she has served as vice chairman of the Democratic Party. I hope you will give her your attention. Please, let me present our Vice Chairman, Mary Lou Berg. Mary Lou Berg is from Wisconsin.
It's my
National
pleasure
Committee
to
woman from there.
the Reverend Jack Day and his new dimensions, who will now parade the flags of the states and the territories of the United States.
The new dimensions of that 152-member choir from the Baptist Church in Miami. All teenagers.
Now, will you please join with me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And now continue standing, please, for the Star-Spangled Banner.
The band is that of Sammy Spear. He used to lead the orchestra on the Jackie Gleason show right here in the same complex of buildings when the Gleason show originated in Miami Beach. And the singers, once again, the flag bearers are the New Directions, 132 teenagers from the Riverside Baptist Church in Miami. Music played an important part in these conventions of the past. In the old days, the band was keyed in with the people who organized the convention. It wasn't unknown that the band occasionally took a little bribe to play a rousing tune when a man's name was mentioned and try to start a stampede for him toward a nomination. Or it could be used by the chairman to shut off debate. The band, he just ordered the band to play and nobody could be heard. Used to be an old trick. Sam Rayburn used to use that. He'd gavel the convention in a recess occasionally, calling for ayes and nays, and all he heard was the ayes for a recess, and then the band would strike up, and people might as well go home. They couldn't be heard anyway.
You may be seated. Now I want to recognize the person who put it all together, who has worked for a year to organize this great convention in every detail, a man who is doomed to nightmares of shuttle buses and scope telephones and gallery passes and bunting for the rest of his born days. The only person I have ever known who has spent 3 months in Miami Beach and yet who will stand before you tonight without a trace of a suntan. Our magnificent convention director, Mr. Richard Murphy.
Thank you very much, Mary Lou. Delegates and alternates to the 36th Quadrennial Convention of the Democratic Party, on behalf of the Democratic National Convention staff, I want to take this opportunity to welcome you here. We are very pleased that you have come. This is the 36th quadrennial renewal of the oldest political party on the face of the earth, the one that has been in the political business the longest period of time. And yet it is the oldest party with the newest convention. This is an integral part of the American political process, and the business you're about to be engaged in is among the most serious that confronts our nation. Just one brief word of advice. You have a fantastic workload ahead of you. Just remember, please, just keep a little sense of humor as these hours groan on, and as the work becomes heavier and heavier, keeping in mind that it's wise sometimes just to listen a little bit to the other fellow as well as to do the talking yourself. Have a magnificent time here, and let's nominate a great ticket that's going to go on to carry us to victory in November. Thank you very much indeed.
Convention manager Richard Murphy, 41-year-old,
Now
who put this whole thing together.
To present a woman who has read the call to every Democratic convention since 1944. For almost 2 generations of Americans, her Alabama has meant that the voting has gotten underway. And I suspect I lost a friend on that, Dorothy, but I don't know how else to say it. Alabama is not the first on the roll call this year, but Dorothy Bush comes first in the hearts of Democrats everywhere. The Secretary of the Democratic National Committee, Mrs. Dorothy Vredenberg Bush.
By authority of the Democratic National Committee, the National Convention of the Democratic Party, called by resolution of February 19, 1971, is hereby scheduled to convene at Miami Beach Convention Center Complex in Miami Beach, Florida, on July 10, 1972, at an hour to be announced at a later date, to select nominees for the offices of President and Vice President of the United States of America, to adopt and promulgate a platform, and to take such other action with respect to any other matters as the convention may deem advisable.
Now I have the distinct honor to present a person who represents the new Democratic Party of the 1970s as well as anyone in America. He is a young man. He is a United States Senator. He was elected in 1970 because he went to the people, listened to what they had to say, made their message his message, and won. He won against the biggest guns the White House could fire against him, including Spiro T. Agnew and President Nixon himself, who made 4 campaign stops against him in Florida, not counting stopovers in Key Biscayne. He won by walking the 1,000 miles from the tip of Florida to its southern tip, listening to the people. I now present the Honorable Lawton Chiles, Democratic Senator from the great state of Florida.
This will be the official welcoming address from the state of Florida by this 42-year-old senator from Lakeland, Florida. The keynote speech will be given by the state's governor tomorrow night, Ruben Askew.
Since I learned I'd been selected to make the welcoming talk on behalf of the great state of Florida, I've been thinking about how it happened that I was given this opportunity. 2 years ago, tonight, I was just halfway through my walk from one end of Florida to the other. And the first statewide poll showed only that 5% of the people recognized my name. I had no money in a race that required $1 million stake, and I was running against a couple of millionaires and a former governor in the Democratic primary, and a 16-year congressman and Judge Harold Carswell on the Republican side. Every day, I was listening to people I met on the road who were completely frustrated and mad at their government. Virtually every person I met felt this way. Whether he or she was young or old, black or white, rural or city, rich or poor, the feeling was the same. The government doesn't care a thing about me. No one will listen to what I have to say. At a place called Crossroads, I listened to a young mechanic, Daniel Sims, who worked outdoors, using a tree to hoist up the cars he was working on. The last year, he'd paid $3,000 in income taxes, and he didn't have any depletion allowance or accelerated depreciation or investment tax credit or deferred compensation plan or a family charitable foundation. He said he didn't mind paying to help people who couldn't help themselves, but he couldn't stand the thought of money he had paid going to people who refused to work, or planes that wouldn't fly, or weapons that wouldn't function. I listened to the frustration of a teacher in Sanford, Florida, Dorothy Gaethel, who had taught remedial reading under a federal grant to a class of 12 in the 10th grade, but who read at the 5th grade level. And she told me how amazing it was to see how they had improved with individual instruction. And as they improved, how they completely changed their attitudes and personalities. How they no longer wanted to drop out, but had a thirst to learn and participate. But then the funds were cut off and the program had to be discontinued. And she asked me why. An aircraft worker whose car was stopped at an intersection in Fort Lauderdale. And when I tried to talk to him, he told me through clenched teeth that it took him an hour and a half to drive home. And when he took his boat to where he wanted to fish, it was now polluted. He said he bought a house and paid more than he could afford to pay because his wife insisted they live in that neighborhood and send their daughter to a certain school. Now daughter was bused across town. His last raise was eaten up by inflation before he got it. And he asked me, now you tell me who the devil represents me. In Liberty City and Miami, I talked to a young black man, 24 years old, who had dropped out of school. He told me the only job he could get was to join the Army, and he knew that if he did, they would put him in a combat unit and send him to Vietnam. I talked to some small farmers at a cattle auction who told me that farmers are getting the blame because food prices are skyrocketing, and yet they're getting the same price for their produce that they got 10 years ago. And their feed, seed, fertilizer, labor, and machinery costs have gone up, and they have to produce more and more just to stand still. So the little farmer is being eaten up by the big farmer. He's forced to go to the city. Before my walk ended, I met thousands and thousands of others who never had a chance to see or talk to an office holder or a candidate running for office. They'd only seen them on television. And because I was out there where the people could see me and talk to me, they hoped that I would be different and that I would listen. So they elected me. That's how I happen to be here to welcome you. But it's not quite that simple, because the people that I listened to got to me. I found that they love this country. I found that they're way ahead of their leaders, that they want to have a part in solving the problems. And they looked me in the eye and asked me, will you come back? Will you be different? Will you listen? So because of how I got elected, I carry a burden of how to keep faith with the people, and that burden has only increased since I've been in the Senate. And because of that burden, I do welcome you as delegates to this convention, but with the same challenge that the people gave me. Will you be different? Will you listen? You must be wondering, too, how you happen to be here. 86% of you have never attended a national convention. 37% of you are women. 15% are black. 22% are young people. 100 are Spanish-speaking, and 22 are Indians. How did this happen? It happened because the Democratic Party was trying to listen, was trying to open up the system. It may not be perfect, but we welcome the tremendous change that has been made. And to the young people that we ask after Chicago to come in and work for change inside the system, instead of standing outside and throwing rocks, I say welcome. You really took us at our word. It looks like all of you are inside. Now we're kind of scared as heck about what you're going to change. We welcome the people that are on the outside of this hall, who are committed to the American dream, and who have come great distances to express their concerns. But with this warning, in your hands now rests the answer to the question of whether meaningful protest can be allowed, and whether any city will allow a national convention to be held within its gates. And we make a welcome to all those workers and volunteers who have spent untold hours planning for the comfort and safety of all of us who are here. And tonight we welcome the millions of Americans who are attending this convention by television. I really don't know what you're going to see here. Probably before this night is over, you're going to see a tremendous fight. But I can tell you what you're not going to see. You're not going to see any staged demonstrations for candidates by hired people. You won't see the acting out of a prepared script which has been agreed to by bosses and power brokers. You may not like everything you see here, but I remind you that for the first time, you could be here voicing your own feelings. You could have gotten your friends together and gone to one of the caucuses or conventions that selected the delegates. For the first time, you didn't have to be a yes man or a party leader or a friend of a politician and on his list to be a delegate. And I wish for all of the forgotten Americans who feel that no one speaks for them, that I could give them a welcome, like our great lady, the Statue of Liberty, gives to those who come to our shores. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuge of your teeming store. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed to me. I will lift my lamp beside the golden door. But I want you to know in 1972, the Democratic Party is rekindling for you that torch of hope that the lady holds aloft. Like a welcome breath of fresh air, it's cleaning out the smoke-filled rooms. It's sweeping out the self-interested boss rule and sweeping in the interest of the people. Because for the first time in the history of our country, a convention is open for the people to run the show. How can anyone believe that this convention, with all of its diversity of people and interest, Wallace people, McGovern people, Humphrey people, young people, black people, rural people, people from slums, Indians, could possibly accomplish anything towards the goal of trying to provide a government that everyone could believe in and participate in? Only if you believe in America.